Heavy rain lashes against the reinforced glass of the midnight train window. Maya traces a condensation droplet sliding down the cold pane. The rhythmic clacking of the steel wheels echoes through the empty carriage. A flickering overhead bulb casts long, dancing shadows across the velvet seats. She holds a lukewarm cup of black coffee, the dark liquid trembling slightly. Every night, humanity boards this invisible locomotive heading into the void. A conductor in a worn coat walks past without making a single sound. We willingly surrender 8 hours of our existence to an unseen thief. The theft is so flawless that the victim never even notices the missing time. A discarded newspaper rustles softly on the floorboards as a draft sweeps in. Maya closes her eyes, feeling the heavy pull of exhaustion behind her brow. The transition from wakefulness to nothingness leaves absolutely zero trace. You cannot pinpoint the exact millisecond your consciousness is stolen away. The coffee cup slips slightly in her loosening grip. A distant whistle cuts through the stormy night, mournful and sharp. Deep inside the brain, a chemical heist has already been meticulously planned. Adenosine molecules pile up like microscopic sandbags blocking a river. The pressure mounts, slowly crushing the vibrant resistance of the waking mind. The train plunges abruptly into a sprawling, pitch-black mountain tunnel. All external light is instantly swallowed by the oppressive darkness. Maya's breathing slows, matching the steady, hypnotic thrum of the engine. The thalamus, the grand gatekeeper of the senses, begins lowering its iron portcullis. The sound of the rain outside becomes muffled, distant, and insignificant. The rough texture of the velvet seat fades into a soft, formless cloud. The thief is not forcefully breaking in. The brain is leaving the front door wide open. A stray spark flies past the window, illuminating the tunnel wall for a fraction of a second. The sensory input cables are systematically unplugged from the main server. The cortex starves in the silence, unable to process the disappearing world. Maya's head tilts forward, her chin resting gently against her collarbone. The recording equipment of her memory is actively being dismantled. A dying flashlight flickers out in the deepest corridor of the mind. You cannot remember falling asleep because the camera stops rolling before the show ends. The scenery morphs violently as the train dissolves into a sterile, blindingly white laboratory. Rows of humming server racks stretch endlessly into the clinical distance. A single red emergency light pulses rhythmically above a steel door. Maya stands in the center, watching the machines power down one by one. The environment is stripped of all warmth, replaced by cold calculation. This is the hypnagogic state, the chaotic borderland between two worlds. A sudden burst of neon green geometry explodes across the sterile white floor. Hallucinations glitch into reality, unanchored from physical logic. A phantom voice whispers a forgotten name directly into her left ear. The auditory cortex misfires wildly in the absence of genuine sound. Maya spins around, but the endless white corridor is completely empty. The thief is sorting through the mental files, tossing random images into the air. The floor beneath her feet suddenly shatters like thin winter ice. A terrifying sensation of gravity failing grips her entire nervous system. She plummets into the abyss, her arms flailing for a non-existent handhold. The brain catastrophically misinterprets muscle relaxation as a fatal fall. A violent hypnic jerk snaps her body rigid in the velvet train seat. Coffee splashes onto the floor, staining the discarded newspaper dark brown. She gasps, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped sparrow. The neon geometry and the falling sensation vanish instantly without a trace. The memory encoding system was already offline when the glitch occurred. She wipes the cold sweat from her forehead, completely oblivious to the hallucination. The train continues its relentless journey through the dark tunnel. The brain sighs, resets the sequence, and resumes the deliberate shutdown. Sleep onset is not a clean guillotine strike across the neck of consciousness. It is a messy, uncoordinated retreat of different neural armies. A forgotten umbrella rolls across the carriage floor with the sway of the train. The motor cortex raises a white flag, rendering her limbs heavy and paralyzed. The auditory centers cling stubbornly to the last echoes of the rattling tracks. A localized blackout spreads through the lobes like ink bleeding into paper. The prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the self, quietly packs its briefcase and leaves. The narrator inside her head abandons the microphone in the middle of a sentence. The observer is completely gone before the event finishes unfolding. A security camera in the carriage sparks and goes permanently black. If there is no one left to hit the record button, The crime technically never happened. The scenery dissolves again, melting into a vast, freezing desert under a canopy of stars. Maya's physical form is absent. She is now merely an abstract point of awareness. Endless dunes of pale blue sand stretch toward an invisible horizon. The wind howls across the barren landscape, erasing any footprints left behind. The thief has successfully stolen the ultimate prize, the continuity of the self. 8 hours of existence are wiped from the timeline of the universe. A shooting star streaks across the absolute blackness of the night sky. The hippocampus transitions from a frantic recording studio into a quiet editing bay. The brain meticulously reviews the stolen footage of the day. Useless moments like the feeling of cold wind or a ticking clock are discarded into the dunes. Only the most emotionally resonant fragments are consolidated into the permanent vault. The thief does not steal to destroy, the thief steals to reconstruct. Without this nightly robbery, the mind would collapse under its own weight. A lone cactus stands in the desert, casting a long, sharp shadow in the starlight. The philosophical paradox of this void is profoundly unsettling. We blindly trust that we are the exact same person before and after the blackout. A pocket watch lies half buried in the sand, its hands frozen in place. The ancient Greeks understood the terrifying proximity of this state to non-existence. They named Hypnos, the god of sleep, as the blood brother of Thanatos, death. To fall asleep is to willingly step into a temporary grave. The ego dissolves completely into the shifting sands of the unconscious. There is no suffering, no joy, no fear, and no time in this barren wasteland. The temperature in the desert drops further, freezing the dunes into solid waves. Maya's physical body back on the train remains perfectly still, a breathing statue. The delta waves of deep sleep wash over the cortex in slow, rhythmic tides. The cellular damage of the waking hours is quietly and efficiently repaired. Toxins are flushed from the neural pathways like debris swept away by a river. The theft of consciousness is the mandatory ransom paid for biological survival. We trade our awareness for the privilege of waking up functional. A pale sliver of a crescent moon rises slowly over the desert horizon. The brain actively prevents the memory of this transition to protect our sanity. Remembering the slow paralysis and the surreal hallucinations would breed terror. Insomnia is often the conscious mind fighting desperately against the impending theft. A small scorpion scurries across the frozen sand, a tiny speck of life in the void. The illusion of continuity is the most brilliant deception evolution ever engineered. We stitch the severed ends of our timeline together and pretend the gap does not exist. A silver locket rests on the train table, catching a faint glint of returning light. The train begins to accelerate, rushing toward the end of the long mountain tunnel. The internal circadian pacemaker detects the subtle shifting of the planetary gears. Cortisol begins to pool in the bloodstream, the chemical herald of the dawn. The desert wind dies down, and the pale blue sand begins to warm. The editing bay shuts down, locking the newly consolidated memories in the vault. The thalamic gatekeeper slowly grips the rusted chain of the iron portcullis. The heavy gate is hauled upward, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The first raw data stream of the morning breaches the quiet darkness of the cortex. The train bursts violently out of the tunnel into the blinding golden sunlight. A sprawling valley of emerald green pines stretches out beneath a clear blue sky. The sound of the rattling steel tracks floods back into the auditory centers. The sensation of the stiff velvet seat registers sharply in the parietal lobe. Maya's eyelids flutter, breaking the seal on the visual world. The prefrontal cortex boots up, the CEO stepping back into the brightly lit office. The narrator picks up the microphone and resumes the broadcast without a stutter. She takes a deep breath, the stale air of the carriage filling her lungs. The cold cup of coffee still sits precariously near the edge of the small table. The brown stain on the newspaper is the only evidence of the night's violent glitch. The 8 hours of absence feel like the briefest flutter of a moth's wing. She looks out the window, watching the morning mist burn off the lake. The thief has vanished entirely, leaving behind a perfectly restored victim. The perfect crime is the one where the victim is grateful for the robbery. The gap in subjective experience is completely invisible to the conscious mind. A flock of white birds takes flight from the canopy, soaring alongside the moving train. She runs a hand through her tangled hair, feeling the reality of her own existence. The self has been successfully rebooted from the dark void of the desert. The memories of yesterday feel seamlessly connected to the reality of today. The grand illusion holds strong against the terrifying truth of the nightly blackout. A ticket inspector walks down the aisle, his silver puncher clicking rhythmically. She hands over her crumpled ticket, exchanging a brief, polite smile. Neither of them acknowledges the profound biological miracle they just survived. We walk through the world blindly, trusting the fragile thread of our own identity. The fear of death is ironic, given how eagerly we practice it every single night. The sun climbs higher, casting warm, golden rays through the smeared window pane. The dust motes dance frantically in the shafts of morning light. Maya takes a sip of the terrible cold coffee, grounding herself in the bitter taste. The sensory world is loud, demanding, and utterly relentless. The brain embraces this chaos, grateful for the data after the long silence. The machinery of life roars back to full capacity, burning energy by the second. The microscopic sandbags of adenosine begin their slow, inevitable accumulation once again. The tab at the neural bar is opened for a brand new day. The cycle of waking exhaustion and necessary theft is an unbreakable loop. The train sounds its horn, a triumphant blast echoing across the green valley. We are creatures defined as much by our absence as by our presence. The missing 8 hours shape the reality of the 16 hours we get to keep. A small child in the next row laughs, the sound bright and piercing. The complexities of the hypnagogic state are locked away in an inaccessible vault. The feeling of the phantom fall is erased, protecting the fragile ego. The neurological vanishing act was performed flawlessly without a single witness. The camera battery was fully charged while the observer slept in the dark. Maya watches her own reflection in the glass, layered over the passing trees. The person staring back is functionally identical to the one who fell asleep. Yet structurally, chemically, and memory-wise, she is an entirely new iteration. The continuity we cherish is merely a convenient story written by the victor. The true self is a fragmented collection of waking moments strung across a void. The train slows as it approaches a bustling concrete station platform. The screech of the brakes is deafening, signaling the arrival into reality. Passengers stand up, retrieving their heavy luggage from the overhead racks. The collective amnesia of the human race is on full display in this carriage. Everyone simply accepts the missing time without asking a single question. The thief operates in plain sight, protected by the very biology of the victims. Maya grabs her coat, the heavy fabric familiar and comforting against her skin. She steps off the train onto the solid, unmoving concrete of the platform. The chaotic noise of the waking city crashes over her like a tidal wave. Sirens wail in the distance, and the smell of exhaust fumes fills the morning air. The delicate, surreal world of the night is instantly obliterated by the day. The brain prioritizes navigation, survival, and immediate sensory processing. The memory of the theft is actively suppressed to prevent cognitive overload. A pigeon pecks at a discarded crust of bread near an overflowing trash can. The mundane details of existence anchor the mind against the existential dread. We ignore the abyss because staring into it would paralyze our ability to function. The biological imperative demands forward motion, regardless of the missing hours. Maya walks toward the exit, blending into the massive sea of rushing commuters. Thousands of reassembled consciousnesses march together under the glass roof. Every single one of them was stolen, dismantled, and returned within the last cycle. The grand design of human evolution relies entirely on this nightly vulnerability. The perfect theft requires the victim to hand over the keys willingly. The brain shuts itself down to save itself from burning out completely. The amnesia is not a glitch in the matrix. It is the core feature of the software. To remember falling asleep would be to witness the terrifying fragility of the ego. We are spared the horror of watching our own minds unravel into the dark. The sun shines brightly on the city streets, warming the cold pavement. Another day of continuous, unbroken reality is accepted as absolute truth. The countdown to the next inevitable blackout has already silently begun. The thief waits patiently in the shadows, knowing the victim will always return. The theft of consciousness remains the most beautiful, terrifying, and perfect crime in nature.